Hello, and welcome back to another episode of C-Suite Unplugged. I'm your host, Adam Legg, and in this series, I talk to Alberta's top CEOs, entrepreneurs, and business leaders about their journey to the C-suite, what keeps them up at night, their perspective as a leader in their industry, and their outlook on the future. If you find this episode interesting or insightful, let us know by heading over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leaving us a quick review and rating. Now, on to the show. Avik, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Adam. Great to be here.
Avik, for our listeners who don't know you yet, can you please introduce yourself and give us your elevator pitch about Capital Power and the role you play?
It would be my pleasure. I'm Avik Day. I'm president and CEO of Capital Power. We are an Edmonton-based power generator that's an independent power producer. We are the largest independent power producer in Canada focused on natural gas. And importantly, we're also the fifth largest power producer focused in the US, which makes us a very significant player in natural gas-fired power generation across North America, or what we call FlexGen. And importantly, our company, over the course of the last 15 years, has focused heavily on providing reliable and affordable electricity with a keen focus on the reliable part. And over the last 15 years, we've focused heavily on being the dispatchable firm power that grids need to maintain reliability and affordability. But while we were doing that, we also had a keen focus on decarbonizing our existing generation capacity across North America. So that's a little bit about who we are. I am a Calgarian, raised in Alberta, grew up here, and have spent the better part of the last 20 years away from the province in my career. And it's been a tremendous honor to come home and be part of this great company and join this fabulous team of people who are working towards powering change by changing power.
Love that. We're going to dig into that exact phrase there and the company in a little bit, but we're going to dig into you and your journey first, Avik. People love to hear the journey of a CEO. They often look at people like you and aspire to be that one day in their career. Tell us a little bit about the journey of Avik. He's finished high school. He's got the whole world in front of him. What were you thinking about? And then what was the journey to where you are today?
Well, I had the great benefit of growing up in this province during the 90s. And I was, a kid born into the latchkey era, in the 80s as well, which was a formidable period for our province in terms of its growth, its prominence within the global energy sector. And for me, I have a keen memory in the 90s of Calgary just being the center of the global energy industry. It was one of the three most important cities in the world for the energy industry. And as a result, we attracted the best and brightest from all around the world to come work here to export all the great things that we were capable of doing everywhere else. So for me, as I came out of high school and entered the University of Calgary, my focus was very heavily on going global and being in the international business community. So if I had to say one thing overlaid my own desires and ambitions, it was really getting out there and being part of the broader international business community. So that's what I focused on coming out of school. I graduated from the Haskayne School of Business with a degree in finance and really was looking for the opportunity to be international and joined Alberta Energy Company, which was the predecessor to Encana. Mm-hmm. And I was really fortunate in that I was one of two kids at the time that got drafted into the upstart AEC International Division, which was a group of 50 global professionals, all who moved to Calgary at the time to go take AEC global. I was just a sponge. I was the kid following these experts all around the world, learning about geology, geophysics, petroleum economics, and learning how to do business in other parts of the world. So, I consider myself extremely lucky to have been given that opportunity early in my career and got to see many parts of the world in very early part of my career. And so that really started me on this journey around global energy, as well as capital markets and finance. From there, I've had the great privilege of being an entrepreneur, being in operating companies, being in capital markets and finance. And my journey just took me through these different experiences, almost entirely all within the global energy universe. But I was fortunate in that I had the experience of being in capital markets, focused in energy, being in a private equity investor, focused on energy, being an entrepreneur, focused on international energy, and then ultimately led me to CPPIB, where I was able to apply that trade on behalf of 21 million Canadians, leading the global energy effort there.
Not a ton of kids out of high school and early in their post-secondary think about that global orientation or the global focus. What made you cast your eyes outside of Canada? Was there just sort of part of your exposure as a young adult, or just what you were interested in? What brought you the global perspective?
It's a little bit of everything, but I think one of the things that really resonated with me as I was going through university and getting exposed to the business program and just having a keen interest in global politics. One of the really fascinating parts of the energy business is that it's one of the few industries where the globe is your playing surface. And the interconnectedness of the industry and how politics and commerce and stakeholder interests and the global climate all intersects. That's more true today than it's ever been. But that's been true through the history of time. That intersection has always, for me, been fascinating. And from a business standpoint, the dynamicism involved with understanding different cultures, understanding different forms of governance, understanding different economic environments in different jurisdictions, and then being able to define, create, and build businesses within that, for me, always resonated. It was that opaqueness of the opportunity set are those opportunities that always felt interesting.
I love that opaqueness of the opportunity set. That's a great saying. Avik, I mean, you've had an incredible growth and trajectory of your career, many exciting opportunities at a relatively young age. What would you ascribe your growth and success to? I mean, many times it's a combination of skill, hard work, and luck. And, if someone were to come to you and say, Avik, how did you do all this with so many increasing levels of responsibility and now a CEO of one of North America's largest power companies, what would you tell someone as they're looking to start their career in terms of how could I model my moves after Avik?
I think the first thing I tell people is focus on the destination and focus on creating the journey. What I mean by that is the destination doesn't have to be a title. It doesn't have to be a role. It doesn't have to be the company that I'm operating in. The destination is, what do I want to be spending my time and effort doing at whatever stage, gate, or milestone I'm going to enter in, whether it's a short-term milestone, a medium-term milestone, or a long-term milestone. Why that's important is the vast majority of our waking hours are spent doing the things that we have to do and hopefully love to do around our job. And if you can't find that love of the game in that, it doesn't matter what journey you create for yourself, because the destination is the wrong destination.
Yeah.
So for me, that's always underpinned my path. I think the second piece of advice I always give folks is it's so easy, and in particular around professional jobs, ones that are white collar in nature, you tend to take an analytical approach to defining your career path. When you quantify and qualify that journey with here's what the 100 people did before me, or here's the path that I saw on a blog, or one that was written in a book, or the one that my professor told me, or the one that my mentor prescribed for me. None of those are current for your situation now. If you want to fulfill your own journey, you've got to do what's right for you in the now. Mm-hmm. And for me, the in the now has always been each and every role I took, I always asked the same three questions. This was applicable to me when I was 22 as a young graduate at Alberta Energy Company, And it was applicable to me a year ago when I entered Capital Power. Question one, is there the opportunity to learn? Two, is there an opportunity that allows me to contribute? And then number three is probably for me the most important. Am I surrounded by people with a common goal bigger than themselves? That energy, when you're surrounded by it, creates a movement. And that's what gets you up in the morning. So for me, those three questions, my path was anything but a straight line. I went from Calgary to New York, switched industries again, went to Houston, started a company in Colombia, ran a hockey team, went to a pension fund. That journey looks incredibly all over the map when you look at it on paper. But the tie that binds all of those experiences, in each and every situation I was in, there was a commonality of people, purpose. It further enhanced and built my own credentials and experience within the global energy industry. And if I was to walk you through each step, you'd see how each move led to the next, including the one I'm at. But it's always hard to do because you have to believe in yourself and your own path as you define it, not how others may define yours.
Yeah, or what is the perceived successful path? You're right, it has to be individual. I love those three questions that you ask yourself at each opportunity. I think those are great nuggets of guidance and advice to a young, aspiring future leader.
I'd go one step beyond that. In that, for me, it was about what I was doing and what the outcomes and impact of the work I was doing, not about the role. Even a year and a half ago, if you and I were chatting, you and I were probably chatting at that time. Yeah. And I probably told you at that time that my focus was heavily on playing in the space of industrial decarbonization, focusing on heavy emitting industries. I had conviction around that thesis. I believed Alberta was going to be at the forefront of that, and I felt that I had the skills to enable that. I didn't know that would lead me to becoming the CEO of Capital Power, nor was I specifically looking to find a specific role. I was looking for opportunity.
That's a great framing. What is your leadership philosophy, and what type of leader do you want to be remembered as amongst the people that you work with?
It's a great question. I've had the amazing opportunity to work for some formidable leaders, some of whom have been the most impactful in the industries that I've been involved in. And I think historically, we all account great leadership to that visual of, General Patton on the hilltop commanding the forces and willing them to victory. But I don't know that I subscribe to that as a leadership model. For me, I firmly believe in the empowered leadership model. And for me, what that means is, creating the environment where you develop the system and the organization that drives the accountability, authority, and autonomy to the leaders who are delivering the business. And so for me, that CEO role is really facilitator in charge, not commander in charge. The oversight of the people and the process to allow those leaders to lead with authority, autonomy, and accountability. As a chief executive officer, the biggest part of the role is removing roadblocks when and if they occur. For me, what I'd like to be defined as is a leader who is great at helping enabling other leaders.
Yeah, enablement, facilitation, breaking down barriers. That's critical role for someone in your seat.
The other part to that also is you're creating an empowered leadership model where you drive autonomy and authority and accountability. Well, you yourself have to have the same. From an accountability perspective, the CEO's role is to set the tone for culture and drive strategy. The authority framework is really around resource allocation. How are you aligning and assigning people, time, and capital on behalf of the corporation?
Avik, you sit on the board of Enactus Canada, which aims to ignite the potential of Canada's future leaders. I wonder, can you tell us a bit more about this organization, how you got involved, and what you hope the organization is able to accomplish?
I would love to. It's an organization that's very near and dear To me, I started as a student in Enactus in 1997 at the University of Calgary. So it's something I've been involved in now running 27 years. What it is it's an organization of student entrepreneurs that are focused on driving impact through social enterprise. And that is very powerful in that these are student-led initiatives. They're commercial in nature, but the measurement of commercial success is impact on people's lives. The focus is on social, environmental, and economic impact for the betterment of people's lives in the communities that they operate in. The organization has been around since the early 90s. Enactus Canada has over 65 chapters across universities all over the country, 1,600 students. And each year they compete, which is the business orientation element of the social enterprise. They compete with each other to see who has the most impact. And then there's a global organization that has over 30 countries around the world that participate in a World Cup competition every year measuring impact. It was probably one of the most important things I did through my university career, because it helped establish, a network for me of like-minded individuals who were entrepreneurial, creative, committed, and believed in their own ability to have an impact. It's been part of my journey ever since. So I've been involved since that day and haven't stopped.
That sounds pretty cool. Impact and global orientation, competition, a little bit of everything.
We will be hosting the national competition in Calgary next spring. So I encourage everyone to come out and watch these students. It's one of the most inspiring days to see university students from around the country compete on some really incredible projects.
Seeing the future in the hands of the young student body will be fascinating. So we'll watch and await eagerly for that to come along. Avik, we're going to switch from you to the company, Capital Power. And I want to carry on from something you said earlier on in your opening remarks, which is you have a tagline where powering change by changing power. I wonder if you can tell us about what that tagline and statement means to you and your colleagues.
It's much bigger than a tagline. It is our North Star. It's what drives our ambition. It's what directs our activities. And it's how we align around that common objective and that mission that's bigger than ourselves. We as a company have been at the forefront of providing reliable and affordable electricity. And that commitment to that here in Alberta, first at home, and then more broadly as we expanded our business, really put us at the forefront of focusing on traditional fossil fuel-fired power generation and advocating for the importance of that reliable and dispatchable generation. But we didn't ignore the clean side either. We built out our own renewable development capabilities. We looked at decarbonization technologies. So when we coalesced as a team last year and looked at the outlook for our business and the growth prospects for our business, we realized that the definition of how power and electricity was going to change was going to require a level of innovation we've never seen, a level of flexibility and agility we've never seen, and the ability to kind of see through pathways to meeting customers' requirements in a different way than has been done before. So that North Star, we feel it's a wonderful statement. It's a concise statement, but powering change means being that change agent to drive outcomes and solutions, but underpinning it is the evolution of power or changing power. Mm-hmm. So we're going to drive change by delivering balanced energy solutions, but we're going to do it by changing how the power or the grid is run going forward. It's our North Star. It's how we're orienting ourselves as a company. We have three core businesses: FlexGen, renewables, trading, and origination. And those three businesses together enable us to deliver balanced energy solutions to large commercial customers who are large consumers of energy. I think all of that sits very nicely under this North Star of powering change by changing power.
I want to explore your views on how power is changing in a minute, but continuing on the company side, again, in your opening remarks, I think you said the largest private generator in the country, and then the fifth largest in the
In
States.
the US, focused on natural gas. Yeah.
How do you fit in those different markets in the sense of the mix of what is Canadian generation versus US in terms of the percentage of the total power production? And I'd really be curious to know your assessment of the two different markets, but Canada and the US. What do they like to operate in? Ease of doing business, ease of raising capital, regulatory burdens, transitions to different kinds of energy sources, et cetera. Would love to compare and contrast of the two countries.
Well, what's important to note is, North America is an integrated energy market, both on the supply of fundamental energy or fossil fuels. It's an integrated network, but in terms of electricity, it's an integrated network as well. So the nuances come at a federal and provincial level or a federal and state level in the US because each individual jurisdiction has its own regulatory framework and how they coexist within the broader integrated market. But, the way I would describe it is on the one end of the spectrum, you have free markets, which Alberta is one of the two. Alberta and Texas are considered the most open electricity markets. It's where generators bid into open markets with generation. Capital decisions are made privately by competing companies within the space. And the free market is relied upon to make supply and demand of electricity meet. On the other end of the spectrum, you have highly regulated markets where utility commissions, system operators are dictating electricity supply to meet demand, and how that capacity is delivered is regulated. For us, where we were born of one of the leading utilities in the province, our assets were spun off of EPCOR in 2009. We were endowed with great generating assets in a market that was evolving here in Alberta. From that position, we've been able to grow this diversified position across North America. So to answer your question, today we're 9,300 megawatts of generation between the US and Canada. And just to put scale on it, on an average day in Alberta, we're consuming about 10,000 megawatts an hour averaged out for the day. So our entire fleet across North America is roughly about the size of our usage here in Alberta in total. We are one of the two largest generators in the province. And the nuances between each of these different markets, we have four core markets: Alberta, Ontario in Canada, WEC, which is really Western US, MISO, which is Midwest in the US, are the two core markets in those regions. What we look for in those markets is a combination of, one, have they been historically dependent on fossil fuels to provide that dispatchable baseload generation? And then secondly, are those markets looking to dramatically shift their reliance from thermal to renewable? Why we like those markets is because it introduces volatility and it requires our skill set to go find solutions. And then the third piece that we always look for is there the opportunity to contract directly with large users of energy so that we can build commercial solutions? Not every market allows for that. And so as we look for opportunities in the US and Canada, I think the 49th parallel is a less of an issue, as what is the specific market structure in that specific jurisdiction? Does it allow for commercial operators of generation assets? And then can we work with commercial off-takers in those markets? Now, there is important differences and nuances between the border with regard to federal policy and federal incentives, and we can talk about that as well. But I think the nuances between specific markets is less about the border and more about what are the economics of delivering an electron to our customer in that market, and how do we compare and contrast those.
Let's follow up on that point and the differences in the broader energy future piece. But continuing on with Capital Power, a few weeks ago, you announced the Genesee generating station had ceased all coal operations, which is a major milestone for the facility, the company, and the province. What does that mean for Capital Power, and how significant do you see that as CEO?
It's very significant. It's, as you stated, significant for the company and the province to have come off coal this quickly, where, 12 years ago, we were 85% plus coal in terms of our generation capacity for the province. And today we're zero. What makes me particularly proud of Capital Power in this regard is that our company itself was 1/3 the size 12 years ago, and we were 90% coal 12 years ago. Unlike many others who have been faced with the same challenge of decarbonizing and delivering a growth story, we've been able to grow while also decarbonizing. So we've tripled our net generation capacity as a company over that period of time. We've grown shareholder value by 12.5% over that time. And we've gone from nearly 90% coal to zero over that course of time. So our ability to move with the market, continue adding value while decarbonizing is what I'm most proud of. In terms of Genesee and specifically, pro forma, when we complete the project, which we expect to complete at the end of this year, we will have increased our capacity at that plant by 50%, while we've reduced emissions by half. Not on a per unit basis, absolute emissions. So we're now delivering for Albertans 50% more power that's available, dispatchable, and reliable 24/7, 365, but we've also reduced emissions. That it is one of the largest industrial decarbonization projects that's ever been done in Canada. It's a material improvement for our company from an intensity level as well. But importantly, the Genesee complex will be the largest generating complex for Albertans. And it's going to be significantly cleaner than it was. And it provides critical, reliable, and affordable generation for the province.
Congratulations on that milestone. I know that's something that has been a long time coming in terms of announcements under previous governments and plans and investments, and it was no small feat. So congratulations on hitting that outcome.
I also think it's a moment for celebration. It's an asset that's been the cornerstone of generation and providing electricity for productivity of this province for nearly 40 years on the back of a coal mining industry that's progressively shrunk. But, there's a whole suite of people who have earned their living over generations in that industry. And I think it's a moment to celebrate their commitment and contribution to this province's productivity over that period of time. It's one of the sides of this that goes unnoticed, but that transition also comes at a cost. But it's one that we're greatly appreciative of all the people who have helped support that industry over the last, 50 plus years.
Maybe this is a good segue into sort of broader energy future and where we're going, at least as a country here, Canada. A few months ago, you announced the cancellation of $2.4 billion carbon capture investment, citing it was no longer economically feasible with the Genesee 2 facility. Can you speak to the conditions that resulted in this tough decision? I know it was a mix of some federal policy and some clean electricity regulations and investor tax credits and contracts for difference. Maybe paint us a picture of the factors that went into that tough decision.
It was a very tough decision. I've personally been involved in carbon capture and sequestration since 2014 when I started with the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board, and have been involved in CCS here in the province since then. When I joined Capital Power a year ago, I was incredibly excited by the amount of work and knowledge and understanding we'd accumulated to bring that to a point where we were ready to proceed with a project. We have gone through the technical and engineering work to determine that, in fact, amine-based capture solution attached post-combustion to a gas-fired power generating plant could have, strong sweep rates and could capture, 90% plus of the emissions on a facility. The challenge for us, and I would say there's no one single party or one single reason why we canceled it. It is a $2.5 billion capital investment. And so our duty to our shareholders is to ensure that we generate a return on our capital investments. And in particular for us, when you look at a carbon capture project, the primary source of revenue is the offset of carbon taxes. This is a 25, 30-year capital investment where we need the visibility on what those taxes that we will be offsetting for that period of time. Absent that, we need another revenue source to be able to make the math work. So the carbon contract for differences was, in budget 23, the federal government's effort to try and bridge that. We have line of sight on federal carbon taxes through 2030, not beyond that. And the hope is that the CCFD would be a bridge to providing that certainty or that, insurance on policy risk of carbon taxes changing. But that in itself wasn't enough. The level of investment for this project attached to an asset that has variable dispatch because our province has been so successful on introducing renewables to the market. And so our asset is there to ensure dispatchability and reliability and firm capacity. But the more renewables we introduce into the market, the less reliant we are on the generation of that asset. And so that profile over time, is also difficult to underwrite against a project that has a 25, 30-year life. All of that, in any project, you've got 4 levers. Project, business, however you want to define it. 1 is the capital investment. 2 is the revenue. 3 is the volume of whatever you're selling. And 4 is your cost structure to operate that business. Those are the only 4 levers we have. And in our instance on carbon capture, each of those levers were insufficient for us to get to something that we could underwrite a 25-year investment on.
A, I guess, is it a project you hope you can revisit in the future? And B, what would you need to see more firmly in place to be able to bring it closer to FID?
It's an interesting question. So, one of the things I've reflected on a lot over the course of the last year as we looked at this project from 2008 to 2024, and I'll just use the US as an example. We've gone from less than 1% renewables to 14% of the grid renewables in that market. Close to 90% of all new capacity was renewable capacity. If you step back and say, why did that happen? The reason it happened wasn't because of policy imperatives. It wasn't because of stakeholder engagement. It wasn't because of tax incentives, although the tax incentives played a role at the beginning to accelerate cost appreciation. It was because renewables is the cheapest form of electricity and the quickest to market for new generation capacity. There was a firm underlying economic reason to invest and deploy renewables. Now, we're living the other side of that, which was some of the unintended consequences of heavy renewable penetration in that we're sacrificing reliability. But the intent and economic output of deploying renewables was very clear. On carbon capture and sequestration, it's not so clear. If you and I were having this conversation 10 years ago when the Alberta carbon trunk line was getting underwritten, I would have told you inherently I had this firm belief that the world would develop a carbon taxonomy that would facilitate and accelerate the investment in decarbonization technology for heavy emitting companies. That belief was that the world would coalesce and leading emitting industrialized economic powers would come together and establish a carbon taxonomy that would allow for the exchange and valuation of offsets and credits. That has not happened. And I think the world has also evolved over that period of time. And as populism has surged, reshoring occurring across countries, geopolitical concerns, economic flight as a result of rising interest rates, the issues of affordability have come to the forefront. The issues of reliable grids, ensuring that we deliver safe, efficient, reliable power, have become a kitchen table conversation that wasn't one 5 or 10 years ago. And so those now supersede the need to establish a clean grid quickly. So for us today, what needs to happen around carbon capture and sequestration is a national conversation of who do we want to be, where do we want to win, and how do we accelerate those technologies and build out of that infrastructure that puts us in a leadership position globally on this opportunity set. And I firmly believe there is that opportunity. The two best places on earth to go do carbon capture and sequestration, Alberta and the Gulf Coast of the US. We have the existing regulatory framework. We understand energy infrastructure. We understand pipelines. We understand subsurface. We already have the environment that allows for the long-term sequestration of carbon. Now the question becomes, which projects do we want to support? Which ones demonstrate leadership at scale? Which ones enable us to meet our collective objectives? And today, we have multiple programs that are facilitating multiple technologies. And a lot of it is incubating newer, earlier stage projects, which is fantastic. It's great from an advancement of technology. But what is harder to do is facilitate large projects like us, because those are frankly nation building projects. And we have to align on whether we want to do them or not.
I want to ask your thoughts about where energy generation is going over the next decade or so. But I first want to talk about, you were talking about the importance of affordability, reliability in terms of your energy and power sources. And I think it really underpins a lot of the frustration we've had with the proposed clean electricity regulations, in the sense that Canada is not a one-size-fits-all jurisdiction. That certain, I call it the fate of geography. Different provinces have the ability to generate clean hydroelectric power, but we in the prairie provinces have a geography that we can't. And so we are needing to turn to different energy mixes that, if we want to ensure affordability, reliability, dispatchability, transmission, is a different mix and a different opportunity set, to use your term earlier. But the electricity regs, I think, are trying to create this blanket approach. I think we're aligned in our concerns about the clean electricity regulations and where they're going and what that would mean for power generation here, at least in Alberta. But what is your take on where that framework is heading, and what message would you like to share with our listeners about how we might use this moment of time to make them better and able to accommodate the differences across the country?
We talked earlier about the conditions for markets that we look to enter in. Alberta today is in an enviable position across North America from where we are from a generation perspective. Today in this province, we have a surplus of dispatchable, reliable generation because the industry invested in new capacity. Today, Alberta has led on renewable development across the country because we had the conditions to make those investments to proliferate that new capacity. I thought you stated it exceptionally well in terms of categorizing and qualifying what we're faced with, and that clean electricity regulations, we came out very early in support of the premise of clean electricity regulations. The basic framework of what the federal government was proposing was sound. But what was missing was the accommodation for the nuances in specific markets. You cannot prescribe nationally a set of rules where geography dictates how baseload critical generation is delivered. And our country, every grid in every market has a certain percentage of that grid that must be served by firm dispatchable generation. Well, markets that have hydro, nuclear, geothermal, they benefit from that firm capacity coming from not just dispatchable and firm, but it's also clean. But those jurisdictions that aren't endowed with hydro or didn't have the necessity to go build large-scale nuclear industries 50 years ago, they don't have a readily available replacement for firm baseload generation. That has to be accommodated for each and every market that's dependent on thermal generation. That is a hard line. And so much of our advocacy around this for the last 7 or 8 months has been around how do we allow for those jurisdictions like ours here in Alberta that is reliant on thermal generation, a glide path to hitting net zero targets by responsibly, efficiently, and economically transitioning that load over time, recognizing it may take longer because we're transitioning 50, 60% of the generation base from thermal to clean sources, and we don't have a readily available, firm and clean and dispatchable source of generation today for those markets. Those regulations must change to adapt for those jurisdictions, some in the Maritimes, to a certain extent in Ontario, and as you described, for the prairie provinces. It must be changed.
Well said. We cannot continue to push a one-size-fits-all approach across this country. It has to be reflective of regional realities or as I've often said, the fate of geography. Avik, as we move to close here, I'd just love to get your thoughts. Where do you see electricity generation going in the next few years, out to a decade? And one of the interesting things that I think has really begun to go on the public consciousness is the growth of the power needs for artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, and the power needs. With any one single search, how much power that's taking, and then you add on top electric vehicle, heat pumps, electrification, so much more. Are we going to have enough power to meet our needs? And as you say, reliably, affordably, and with certainty and stability?
For 20 years, so from the late 90s right up until the pandemic, if we were talking about electricity demand growth in North America, so this applies both to Canada and to the US, we would have said maturing population, declining GDP growth, growing energy efficiency, and rapid transition of the existing electricity supply grid. All of those together provided an outlook over 20 years of relatively flat electricity demand. So we were on this journey of energy transition, which was let's displace heavy emitting for low emitting and low cost generation. And at some point, batteries will plug the hole and we'll have a new energy supply system that'll serve everyone. As you stated, post-pandemic, the whole world has changed because we've added secular growth from multiple places. So this is not just a AI, ChatGPT, data center conversation. It's, as you said, it's growing electrification, it's growing EV demand, it's reshoring in the US, it's expanding electrification, and most importantly, it's overall economic growth that the continent is facing, which is driving up energy demand. We see energy demand increasing. Alberta, Ontario is both going to be, somewhere between 1% and 2% per annum. Overall, this will roughly equate to a doubling of power generation demand in North America over the next 25 years. Places like Ontario will grow faster than that. The backdrop of Alberta is fantastic right now in terms of our economic outlook. You probably have better numbers than I do, but 150 to 200,000 people moving into the province each and every year. Strong economic outlook, as recently validated by our credit upgrade. The wind is absolutely in our sails in this province. And in particular, as we adjusted to a new energy order over the last 15 years, we adapted to it in this province. The economy is no longer singularly dependent on the plight of new oil and gas capex. Our positioning for this next decade, given the youthfulness of our population and where we're positioned in terms of taxes and economic growth and a sound place to do business, lends itself well to that growth, and electricity demand will follow that. In terms of our ability to meet that demand, we can separate the conversation around data centers. What's really great about Alberta is that we've always existed in a market that served large commercial industrial customers. So we know how to do this here. 70% of our load is in service of large commercial customers, i.e., oil and gas companies, petrochemical firms, agriculture firms. We know how to do this. Many jurisdictions don't. Although data centers is a new, sexy, shiny object for us to go chase, the critical skill sets to serve large commercial customers exists in spades in this province. And oh, by the way, on top of it, we've got long-term supply of gas. We've got strong infrastructure, strong market environment and physical environment to support that growth. What's going to be required across all of North America is a continued greening of our grids, but also firming of our grids with dispatchable generation, and also the modernization of our grids. Each and every jurisdiction is going to have critical decisions to make around how to fund that development of that growth, how to minimize the impact on consumers, and to accommodate that growing load from large customers while balancing that with the new needs of consumers. Some jurisdictions are going to have a clearer path to get there, while others will have more difficulty given the construct of their own grids.
This is one of the most fascinating topics, I think, in our modern day is power and the evolving nature of demand and supply of power. I could probably keep going for days here, but I know we've both got to do our jobs. So I'll close by asking you the question about Alberta, Avik. And my question is, are you bullish or bearish on Alberta? And do you think we're on the right track in terms of our economic trajectory and our ability to create prosperity for Albertans, or do we need to change track?
No, I think I said it earlier. If my bullishness wasn't clear,
It was good. I just want to reinforce it.
I just think the conditions couldn't be better for our province at this moment. The conditions of having a government and population that's supportive of business growth overall, a population that is oriented toward working and growing the economy, a place where you can afford to live safely, efficiently, and in comfort, and the tax base around that to support that growth. Those conditions are what allow us to facilitate new investment in that province across multiple industries. We happen to be in an environment where we're also constructive on energy, and that's helping to support that growth. The criticalness of us aligning around federal policies that support the continued growth of energy from this province, I think is the most critical piece of this going forward. Because if we do so, it'll allow us to grow in every and all other industries as well.
Well said, for sure. Avik, anything you want to touch on that we didn't get through questions that you want to leave with the listeners, or any question you wish I had asked but I didn't?
I think we covered a lot of ground, but it's been an honor to chat with you today and share a little bit about our story. I'm incredibly proud to be part of Capital Power. It's a company that's really led on electricity and power here in Canada. And I think the opportunity for us to create an industry leader across North America is one that myself and my 900 or so colleagues are excited to get after.
We hope you have the wind in your sails. It sounds like you do, and wish you good continued success, both personally and with Capital Power. And thanks for being a great member of the Business Council. Thanks again for the podcast.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate all the work you do as well.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of C-Suite Unplugged, an Alberta Better podcast series. This podcast is a production of the Business Council of Alberta. You can learn more about us at businesscouncilab.com. We'd love to connect with you on social media, so give us a follow at BizCouncilAB, that's B-I-Z, Council AB, on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. If you like this episode and want to support our message of shared prosperity for all, please be sure to head over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts to subscribe, rate the show, and give us a quick review. New episodes drop every other Tuesday. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.